Dudes have made AI avatars of their ex-girlfriends to get them through lonely nights. There's a new app. It's called Talk to Your Ex. The app is currently on waitlist. So many people are eager to use this. On the app, Talk to Your Ex, you can create an avatar that looks kind of like your ex-girlfriend. And then you upload chat logs to the app. It's a language learning model. And then the app learns to talk like your ex-girlfriend. And the more chat logs you upload, and look, everybody now has every word you ever utter to another person on permanent record on their phone. You just upload that, and then you get to talk to your ex-girlfriend who dumped you again. Really sad, really pathetic, obviously super creepy. Can you imagine even these poor women who dump these creepy dudes, and then they've got a fake version of themselves? Like the guys just say, no, you can't dump me. No, you can't. Well, maybe you can go anywhere you want, but I'm going to create a robot version of you and we're going to be together forever. I love you. Super. I feel terrible for these women. And I feel bad for the guys too, because I could see how this could be tempting. If you'd have to get through a lot of stages first. You'd have to be really alienated from your community. You'd have to be super addicted to pornography. You would have to be really bad at talking to people and going out and meeting a new girl. And you'd have to be pretty divorced from reality in order to get into something like this. But that describes a lot of people today. So many of these supposedly disconnected social pathologies, I think, owe to this basic fact that we live our lives now mostly in the virtual realm. We don't live our lives mostly in the real world. I mean, literally we do, because time goes on and we move and our hearts continue to beat and we continue to be both body and soul and, flesh and stuff. But in our own perception of it, now we're spending most of our day on screens. When we talk to people, we're having most of our social interaction mediated by a screen, mediated by a keyboard, mediated at the very, very least by a Zoom camera. So for those guys, if your relationship with your ex-girlfriend was, let's call it 60% on your phone anyway, then what's the difference? Just from the matter of perception. Obviously, there's a difference because in one, you're talking to a disembodied robot demon kind of thing. And in the other one, you're talking to a real flesh and blood human being. But if most of your relationship is virtual, then what's the difference between your real ex-girlfriend and this weirdo robot? From 2003 to 2022, Americans reduced their average hours of face-to-face socializing, of hanging out, dramatically. Just men in that slightly under 20-year time span, men reduced their face-to-face socializing by 30%. Unmarried Americans, who you would expect would continue to socialize. Married guys, sometimes we have, the wife doesn't want us to go out to that cigar night, and, that's usual. But the unmarried guys, you figure they can go out and socialize whenever they want, right? Well, it turns out the unmarried Americans are socializing at an even lower rate. Or rather, I should say, the rate of decline is even higher for the unmarried Americans than it is for the married Americans. That dropped by 35% for them. Teenagers, well, at least teenagers are still hanging out, right? Teenagers are young and vibrant. They don't really have that many responsibilities. Their drop was 45%. Boys and girls ages 15 to 19 reduced their weekly social hangouts by more than 3 hours a week. So, in the words of The Atlantic, this is a liberal magazine. It's not even one of these typical right-wing, the decline of the West, the world is over, it's all done, catastrophic articles. It's from The Atlantic. This is a center-left magazine. They say, in short, there is no statistical record of any other period in U.S. history when people have spent more time on their own. We've heard about this for many, many years. Robert Putnam wrote the famous book Bowling Alone about the decline of civic associations, of people just spending more and more time alone. You've seen a lot of social scientists talk about this in recent years. Why is that? Well, it's not just that they're sitting alone twiddling their thumbs. They're sitting alone, and sometimes they're doing activities that are totally alone. Sometimes they're just watching TV. But it scratches the itch a little bit of socializing when you watch TV because there are people on screen. They're not really there with you. They're not really talking to you, but there are these glittering images of people. So you can kind of almost convince yourself that you're socializing. You're not, and it's not really going to satisfy you, and it is going to make you more lonely and alienated, but you can say, okay. Or the worst version of that, you're looking at pornography. It sort of feels, scratches an itch, so to speak, I guess. You sort of feel like you're with people in intimate acts, but you're not. It's just glittering images on a screen. Or let's say video games. Now, video games, you might say, well, it's a little more social because there might be people who are playing live with you. You might hear someone in your earpiece. You might see someone in a chat log. Or you go on a social media app and you read some tweets and you kind of feel like, but it's not, people are really alienated. And not merely coincidentally, when people are alienated in this way from the physical world, they start to get all sorts of ideas about how their bodies really don't have anything to do with who they are. They start to get all sorts of ideas about how their families and communities don't have anything to do with who they are. You see community breakdown. You see even the breakdown of the family, of course, and then even the breakdown of the human person, a division between body and soul, if that were possible, at least an imagined division of those things. Why? Why all of this coming apart? Because no matter how hard we try, no matter how advanced the glittering screens get and the technology and the chat bots and everything else, we are incarnate beings. We are flesh and blood, and soul and spirit, but flesh and blood too, in time and space and history. We're human beings. This is why COVID made everyone really depressed and rates of suicide skyrocketed and rates of drug use skyrocketed because Zoom calls are not enough. That's not real life. Your computer is not real life. We are human beings. And so long as we remain human beings, as long as we don't have the chip fully in our brain stems and we're not totally plugged into the matrix, and frankly, even once we are, we're still going to be bodies. And you can't have a virtual wife. And you can't even really have a virtual friend. That's a fine beginning. Maybe you meet your wife on some dating app. Maybe you make a friendship over the internet. But unless that relationship ceases to be mediated by technology and screens and develops into a fully human relationship that involves body and flesh and blood, and you're going to hug your friend and give him a high five and sit together and spend time in a real physical space, you are going to feel more alienated. You are going to feel less and less human. No coincidence. Another related story. Less than half of Americans today feel very satisfied with their own lives. You might say, well, isn't that just always the case? Life is suffering. This is a tough life, kid. And you got, no, actually, this is just the third time in more than 2 decades that less than half of Americans say they're very satisfied with the way things are. 47% of US adults express high satisfaction with their lives. That's dropped 3 points over the past year, and it's only 1 point higher than the 2011 record low for that trend. So what does that tell us? Is it just that these snowflakes, the typical right-wing, cheap, kind of boomery right-wing responses, these snowflakes don't know how good they've got it. They've got iPads, for goodness sakes. We didn't have iPads when I was a kid. We had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to go to school. These people are so depressed. They shouldn't be. Snap out of it. Cupcake? Okay. The liberal view, not totally unrelated, is, no, guys, you don't understand. GDP is really high. No, guys, you just don't get it. You don't understand. It's actually really, I know you're miserable and your relatives are killing themselves on fentanyl and your wife left you and your kid thinks that she's a dude and the country's been flooded by people who don't speak your language and you got to press 4 for English when you call the bank. But actually, you're really happy. You just don't know it. Here, take some more psychiatric drugs. That'll remind you how happy you are. That's another take on it too. The leftists are going to say, well, the total tanky communists are going to say people are unhappy because of capitalism. And there's a little truth to that, but these guys are total left-wing lunatics and they're unhappy because of the bourgeois values and we need revolution and blood in the streets for them to be happy. None of that is quite accurate, I think. People are less satisfied with their lives because they are living less human lives. The issue isn't that people need more psychiatric drugs. The issue isn't that people need more money. You know, Barack Obama saying if we just give iPhones to everyone in Syria, that's going to have them convince them to stop being jihadis. Frankly, you give iPhones to everyone in Syria, they're going to be less happy if you ask me to make a bet about it. It's not because we need to overthrow the bourgeoisie and have blood in the streets and have a communist revolution. It's not because we need to just buck up and have a stiff upper lip entirely. It's because your satisfaction is going to come from your happiness in the ancient Aristotelian sense of that term, eudaimonia, flourishing, from doing excellent activity in virtue over an extended period of time. That's what's going to make you happy. And this is ultimately the measure of the political health of a society. The ultimate measure of the health of a society is not GDP. It's not my freedom. You know, it's not, hey, I have the right to have orgies every Thursday night and I can chop off my appendages. Isn't this the greatest society? No, that's not the measure of it. The measure of it is not total autonomy. The measure of the political health of a society is satisfaction, happiness, eudaimonia, really basic stuff, folks, because the major charges of a society are do good and avoid evil, just as those are the major charges of individuals as well. And when you see numbers like this, that should give everyone pause. And that should your first reaction should not be denial, and your first reaction should not be to just continue pushing the same old nonsense you've been pushing forever that has led us nowhere. If you want to be happy, then you've got to take happiness seriously. My friend Dennis Prager has said, happiness is a serious business. And the people who took happiness seriously were the ancients. The people who took happiness seriously were great men like Aristotle, okay? And then you baptize that kind of pagan concept of happiness in the church through St. Thomas Aquinas. Something very important to think about as this Lenten season has us giving up all the glittering material things to more or less degree and focusing on what really counts. That was a very, very good clip. And you know it, and I know it. And now you should ring that bell and subscribe, and that way you'll get many more good clips. We'll see you next time.